that just leaves me to introduce Larry for the final session of this year's Big Book Seminar. Anyway, thank you very much.
Good morning again. If I'm remiss in saying, I also want to share and convey my deepest sentiments and gratitude to not only the newcomers group, Bristol Union, but to the city of Bristol and the UK for being such fine and grateful host. Every time I come over here, I thoroughly enjoy myself, and I really do feel at home. That's why I kind of interact the way that I do with most of you, and it's just a heartfelt and warm feeling. So thank you very much. We want to start again and do a review and refresher, and we're going to do this review back up to the 8th and 9th step, and then we're going to continue on today with the 8th, 9th, 10th, and the 11th and the 12th step. We started out talking about the mitigating factor and why we're here all together, and that's a common problem. And we talked about how Silkworth was the first one to really define and simplify this problem. You know, Eileen talked about it last night between Bill and Dr. Bob. And another thing about what she talked about was when Ann Smith and Henrietta Seidling said a prayer for Dr. Bob, because he had finally come around to halfway admitting the fact that he had a problem with alcohol, and they said a prayer. Henrietta Seidling said a prayer for Dr. Bob, and she came back to Dr. Bob and she says, Dr. Bob, I got an answer to my prayer. She says, I don't understand the meaning to it, but this is all I got, and it was given to me that you should not and cannot touch one drop of alcohol. She says, I don't understand that. But that's what the answer to my prayer was. You see, the Oxford group they were great at meditating. They would get up in the morning and they would sit quietly, definitely quiet, a group of them with the Bible open to the book of James. And they would write down every thought that came with pencil and paper. And they would write down every thought that came to them. Matter of fact, this is an exercise where part of our 11th step came from. And that's how I learned how to meditate in the morning, because I knew nothing about it. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in step 11. But anyway, they sat there and they meditated, and that's the answer that came through meditation for Dr. Bob. 2 weeks later, here comes Bill Wilson. And sit down to Dr. Bob, who's a very skilled and well-read surgeon. As Eileen said, the guy had read just about every book about alcoholism, Common Sense of Drinking, all of these books trying to do something about his drinking. But when Bill Wilson sat down with Dr. Bob and explained to him step 1, why he could not drink, he'd sit down, a broken down, slick New York stockbroker, sit down in front of a well-read, educated, skilled surgeon, and also in the Oxford group, when he said he was only going to give this guy a little bit of his time, and when he explained this problem to him, it lasted for hours. So needless to say, the reason I said that is because if we are equipped with the knowledge and the truth about us. That's why I made the statement that the only true alcoholic is a recovered alcoholic. You know you are equipped with the information and the knowledge about who you are. And if you know that for a fact, you can convey that message and gain the confidence of another person. And that's what Bill did to Dr. Bob. I mean, it cut through all of his education, everything. When he sat down and explained to Dr. Bob why he couldn't drink and why, against every attempt that he had made, why he couldn't quit. And that's why he said, this guy speaks my language. So it's important from the very beginning, and also I'm going to show you when we get to step 12 that carrying the message is when we take the first step to the newcomer. And if we take that first step very succinctly and honestly and humbly, we can help. We can't make them willing, but what we can do is help them to believe. And that's and that's the whole thing about it. It's coming to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And when we see that operating in another person, it's going to melt every bit of prejudice and every bit of ignorance that we have. And that's the power of the program. So that's why it is incumbent upon you and very, very important that you understand who you are and that you be able to explain this allergy and the obsession, because that's what the 12th step is about. Carrying this message. And the thing about that is that if you're not sure, then maybe we need to start asking some questions. So we start off like this. Silkworth talks about the problem, and he defines it as twofold. A physical allergy with a mental obsession. He says that any description of the alcoholic that leaves out the body is incomplete. And what he said is the first drink is taken up here in the mind. We have to give ourselves permission to take the first drink. And once we take the first drink and put it in the body, it becomes a physical thing then. You know, the mind is supposed to control the body, but once we put the drink in the body dictates to the mind. And how it does that has an allergic reaction, and this allergy from the first drink creates a craving, a phenomenon of craving. One that you can't understand and one that the present public doesn't understand. They do not understand why it is that we just can't take one drink. Well, neither do we until we understand this. You see, it's a mind thing, but once you put it in the body, it becomes a body thing. And the body dictates through the craving the second drink. And the second drink, then you're craving twice as hard as you was with the first drink, and it mushrooms. This number here is infinitum. And once we take the first drink, we cannot control where we're going to end up when we go through the well-known spree. And sometimes these sprees last for days, sometimes they last for weeks, sometimes they last for months. We can't determine that. This physical allergy that we have determine that. Now sometimes some things intervene, like jail, blackout, getting sick, or getting knocked out, getting in fights. But once we come up for air and we see the things that we've done on this spree, someone says, guess what you did? You jumped on top of the table in the pub and danced last night. And you said, no, I didn't. And they said, yes, you did. Here's your picture. And when they show you your picture, guess what? You're irritable, restless, and discontent. And you know, the thing is that we do, and you know, the part about it, like Bill says it, you know, we have fun with this. We're the only people that can really laugh at ourselves. But this thing about the drink is infinitely grave because it kills us. And when we go through this spree and we end up out here, irritable, restless, discontent, that term is used perfectly. Because irritability comes from anything, restless, as some of us, I'm telling you, it amazes me sometimes, you know. We are people that, because we don't have peace here, we can't sit still very long. We got to be fidgety. You know, we're restless. And you know, the thing about that is that, you know, that comes from us not being able to be comfortable in our skin. Us not being able to be in solitude. You see, it's a difference in being alone and it's a difference in being in solitude. When we are alone, it's like we're completely and totally depressed and we're lonely. And that's one of the emotions that really just wreaks havoc with alcohol. But when you're in solitude, that means that you may be by yourself, but you have something to do. Your mind is focused on something else as opposed to sitting there focused on what it is that you don't have. And you know, loneliness and also depression and things of that nature, you know, our book tells us on page 58 that even though people have grave and emotional and mental disorders, they can recover. And the only thing, and Bill puts that to a point, he says, the only thing that we have to have, he didn't say you had to be honest, just the capacity to be honest. That's real simple. Not be honest, but the capacity to be honest. So when we're sitting here, irritable, restless, and discontent about something, this condition here is creating more problems. First, we start out with one up here. We go through the well-known spree, and we end up out here with problems on top of the problems. And they seem insurmountable and unsolvable. And when this emotional barometer here in the mind rises to a point till it's unbearable, it says we think about how we can get comfort. And that's the sense and ease and comfort that comes at once by this first drink. So we reach over here again and take this drink. Once we take this drink, we just circle it like this. Over and over and over. And as we're going over and over, our life is getting smaller. We're spiraling down. And some of us end up in the closet drinking. Some of us end up in the gutter drinking because we have extricated and pushed people out of our life, and we end up just alone and by ourselves and just drinking. And then someone tells us why it is that we can't drink. And that's because of this allergy. We can drink, but we can't drink safely. Every time we drink, we catch consequences. And you know what? Over here, this obsession, an obsession is an idea that overcomes all other ideas. When I found out I couldn't drink, I said, okay, I'm gonna stop. I just quit. But you know what? I found I was worse at quitting than I was drinking. I could stop, but I couldn't stop starting. As a matter of fact, I stopped about 4 times in one day. But I couldn't stay stopped. So stopping the starter is over here in the mind. The first drink is taken in the mind. That's where we take it. We give ourselves permission to succumb to this obsession, and our book says this obsession places us in a place where we're beyond human aid. It says our defense must come from a power greater than ourselves. That's what Bill explained to Dr. Bob. And he explained to Dr. Bob that this obsession is so strong that there's no way that he could quit on his own. So if you can't drink and you can't quit, you're powerless. Simple as that. If this condition is prevalent in your life, there's no way you're going to be successful. No way you're going to stay married. No way you're going to be able to hold a job. No way you're going to be able to sustain any type of health. No way that you're going to be able to have any type of relationship with anybody or anything. And there's no way unless you have some enablers to keep you out of the criminal system. You're going to get some type of DWI, public drunkenness, or something. You see, this condition affects every area of a person's life. And this is what Silkworth explained to us about why it is that we could not metabolize and take alcohol like normal people. Now, normal people do not have to use willpower to stay away from this, because willpower only works on the truth. Willpower would not work on obsession. And some people say, well, I understand what you're saying, but you know, when you put the alcohol in the body, it turns into a physical metabolism, biological problem with how the body metabolizes chemicals. And we already know that there are certain drugs and certain chemicals that can control the human body. A person says, well, I don't have to worry about that because I can control anything. Well, I submit to you that you let someone give you a laxative, and you take that laxative, and I'd like to see you use self-will or pray your self-control of your bowels. That's a chemical reaction. It's sort of humorous, sort of crude, but this is the same way. When we put alcohol in our body, there's no way that human will or praying is going to stop this craving. We've all tried that. So the point is that once it becomes physical, we lose control. We cannot control the amount that we drink, neither when we really, really want to, we can't quit. This is page 45. He emphasizes this again. "44. It says, in the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism. We hope we have made it clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. If when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, you're probably alcoholic. Those are the two things that are in place, that you can't quit entirely and you have little control over the amount that you take. It makes no difference what you do on the alcohol, whether you get depressed or whether you fight or pass out. But the thing is that as long as those two things are in place, Bill says you're probably alcoholic. And the reason he said you're probably alcoholic is because that's something that you've got to diagnose yourself with. You've got to come to the grips and admit, yeah, that's me. I can't do that. And when you understand how Bill writes, Bill sort of soft sells things to you, and then he comes right back around and drives home the very same thing that he's telling you point blank. And that's how he does it. And the reason he does that is because he was more direct when he was writing the book, started writing the book in 1937. And some of the people in the fellowship was the same way. Says, you can't tell people that, Bill. You're too direct, Bill. You know, you're too hard, Bill. That's what they was telling him. And so he compromised and sort of softened the book up. But when you read it, he'll soft sell you something, he'll come right back around and smack you in the face with the self same thing that he. And that's what, and that's why a lot of our programs have been watered down. People say, you don't have to do that. Well, all you got to do is read it in the book, because the book is the directions. And he tells you very, very directly that you must. It kills you. There's no way you can get rid of self without God's help. And so that's why we took on the studying the book, to find out what it is that Bill was trying to convey. So this is the first step. Knowing the first step, we looked at step 2, which is solution. You see, the problem defines the solution. If the problem is powerless, the solution is power. And we looked at that power in 2 places: AA fellowship, AA program. The AA fellowship is made up of men and women, sponsors, and it supports us. I know I made a statement last night, and I'm going to show you where it is. You know, because it tells us that the only reason that we meet is so the newcomers can find the meeting that they seek. That's on the page, bottom of page 15. It says there's scarcely, now listen to this. This is the last 5 sentences of the bottom of page 15. There again, he soft sells it. There is scarcely any form of trouble and misery which has not been overcome among us. Scarcely any form of misery that had, I don't care what your problem is, these 12 steps can overcome it. And then he says, in one Western city and its environs, there are 1,000 of us and our families. We meet frequently so we can stay sober. Is that what it says? No, we meet frequently so newcomers can find the meeting that they seek, because the steps keep us sober. We have to be sober to guide the newcomer through the steps. Once you go through the steps will keep you sober. Scarcely any form of trouble has not been overcome by working the steps. So, when we're looking at this, the AA fellowship is one of such that it exudes and gives strength and hope to the newcomer that maybe he can stay sober. But while he's there, the old timers are talking to him about how their experience that they worked the steps. Not how they stayed sober on a sunny or a rainy day, and not how the dog got sick and the spouse, none of that goes on in our meetings. We talk about the steps. Because if you're talking about the steps, as Eileen was talking about last night, a psychic change, a personality change, sufficient to recover. Psychic lends itself to the mind. Personality lends itself to the mind. This is where we have to change in the mind. And the steps is the only thing that can produce that change through a power greater than ourselves. I was talking about last night, this is a fact, and this is a fact. All you have to do is be willing here, and all you have to do is believe here. Booze should make you willing. We can't make you willing. But hopefully booze has beaten us in a state of submission to the point where we're at least willing to believe something different. And if we believe something different, we stand here at the turning point in step 3, and that is when we turn our will in our lives, and we learned yesterday that what it means to turn our will and our life over pertaining to the basic instincts of life, self. The basic instincts that create self. Over to a God of our understanding. You know, yesterday I talked about how it is that we can understand God. And our steps is very, very clear if you look at it this way. There's no way that we can understand something that we can't see, feel, hear, taste, or touch with our mind cluttered with resentments, fear, and guilt, remorse. That's anybody, not necessarily talk about alcoholics. No one can understand anything about spirit if their mind is cluttered with prejudices, resentments, bigotry, ignorance. All that stuff has to be cleared out of your mind before this spirit will enter into your consciousness and make himself known. We have to remove all of our ideas and our opinions and our concepts, and then new opinions and concepts will come in. That's with anything. That's not just with alcohol, that is a principle. You cannot learn the principle of numbers if you think it ought to go a particular way and someone is trying to teach you. And that's what's wrong with us humans. We know everything. And someone is trying to show you and tell you a different way, and we refuse to listen. We got our own concept, own opinions, and we will hold on to that to death. And ego and pride just will not let us say, you know what? I was wrong and you was right. So in this concept that we're talking about, trying to find a power greater than ourselves, we have to make a decision to give up on what? Our way. Why? Because our way has not and will not work. So when we make a decision, then we have to carry it out in step 4, a strenuous course of action. And that is, we have to inventory the things that come out of our life in effort to live life on self, which we develop resentments, fears, and guilt and remorse through harm done to others. And our book says that unless we are thorough and complete and honest about making this attempt to examine ourselves, there can be little or no peace or contentment attained. So when we go about this, step 4, when we write this stuff down, this is the best thing that we can do. We can be as honest as we possibly can. As Steve was saying, how honest can we be when we've lived a life of deception and deceit and lies? Well, if we just humble ourselves, and to whomever it is that we believe, just ask them to give us the peace and quiet and the strength to do this. We can get enough honesty. Remember, Bill left it on a very, very, very simple start. If you got the capacity. See, that's where that comes from. If we have the capacity to be honest, guess where the rest is going to come from? Our willingness to take this step, and this power is going to come in. Because, see, being honest, it's like unpeeling the layers of an onion. We take the top layer off, and the moment we take the top layer off, we see another layer. And we keep peeling it off and peeling it off until we get down to the meat or the heart, the center of the onion. And that's about what life is. We continue to, Bill says, outgrow our handicaps. We're never going to get perfect, but what we are going to do is achieve some spiritual progress. And each time we pull a layer of this onion off, the very layer that we get to, it's not going to look as good as we're going to peel another layer off. So when we get to step 4, that's what we're continuing to endeavor to do. To get down to the root cause, the exact nature, the inherent characteristic, the inherent, the innate, where it comes from, the root of it. And then when we look at that, we can see very, very succinctly that that has become objectionable in step 5. And when it's objectionable in step 5, then that's when we ask God, ourselves, and another human being to get a different viewpoint. Step 4 is our viewpoint. Step 5 is more than a confession. It is a different viewpoint. Matter of fact, it's where we take it to another person and they give us their opinion on it. And their opinion is guided and directed by a power that they've already found by this process. So when we get to 6 and 7, they work together. Step 6 is where we are. Step 7 is where we want to be. That's what I was talking about yesterday. We know. I don't care if we don't open our mouths and we say quiet. We know what's up here. We know who we really are. And we know what we're capable of doing. I don't care how big an act that we put on, but we know. But that's just part of it. Knowing and willing to do something about it is two totally different positions. And the thing is that our concepts and our opinions and our beliefs that we have, knowing the way that we are, we don't know what we can become. So that's what keeps us there. We know that life is full of misery, full of pain, and full of anger. But you know what? We've lived that way so long till we're somewhat comfortable with that. And we're saying, oh no, I don't know what's going to become of me. Well, you know, whatever it is, it's got to be better than where you are. And that's step 7. And that's what we have to do. The moment that we admit that things are objectionable and we know that we're living, let's just say this. I'm going to do like Bill. Let's just say, I'm not going to say a miserable life. Let's just say we all know our life could be better. We know that right now. We know that our life could be better. Well, what's stopping us from having the life that we want? That's not a person in the room has the life that they want. They may have an okay life, but it's not the one that they want. So what's stopping us? Our concepts and our opinions about what we're going to become. Yeah, I remember I used to think, me being from a pretty, as Bill said, a pretty worldly view when I come in. And you know, I've never been a person to kind of adhere to churches and preachers and things of that nature. And I heard the word God and all this, and I said, oh man, my goodness. I'm telling you, I didn't want to hear that. All the things that I had done and the guilt and remorse that I had to come to God. My goodness. I'm telling you. But I knew where I was worst. And I had enough sense to know that I hadn't given this thing a fair chance. And so what I did was believed another person. And I found out that my understanding of God was one of such that would work for me. I didn't have to believe in Moses in the Red Sea. I didn't have to pay tithes. I didn't have to get baptized. I didn't have to do none of that to find God. Now, some people find God that way, and I'm not knocking that. Like I said, you all will never know whether I belong to a religious organization or whether I don't, because it doesn't come into play. But one thing you will know is that I believe and know and understand a power greater than me. And that's what you have to do, is find that power that will solve your problem. And that's a simple thing. All we have to do is be willing to take the action, because the action that we take is different than here. We have to change the course of direction. Steps 6 and 7, remove the things. See, 4, 5, 6, and 7, that deals with our thinking. 8 and 9, we have a different viewpoint of thinking, which we're going to talk about this morning in 8 and 9. And when we get to 8 and 9, we have a new attitude, a new relationship with God, and that gives us the motivation to go out and correct the damage that we have done in the past. In steps 8 and 9, it's more written on those steps than anything, because there's a lot of things that we have to do in steps 8 and 9. And people will say, well, what about this? Or what about that? Well, as Bill writes it very succinctly, you know, and steps 8 and 9. What time are we going to break, Peter? 11? All right, give me a heads up on that. And another thing in steps 8 and 9, people want the promises before they do anything. That's what they want, the promises. Now let me step back here on page 75. I don't want to read this on page 75. And step 5. Because people always want to ask, and I was the same way, we always want to ask what the results is going to be before we do it. How do I know that I'm going to have, how do I know when I have a spiritual awakening? This is as a result after taking step 5. The second paragraph, this is what we have to do. We pocket our pride and go to it, illuminating every twist of character. Now remember, we learned that our character defects was selfishness, dishonesty, self-seeking, and fright, and inconsiderate. We have to illuminate every twist of how our selfishness, our dishonesty, our self-seeking, and frightened and inconsiderate character has affected people. And if we illuminate every twist of it, we can see the pattern of how we've been using these instincts and how the instincts have warped us emotionally. That's why we have to look at this. And it says, every dark cranny of the past. That means we have to go back as far as we can remember and bring up everything. Every means every. And then it says, once we have taken these steps, withholding nothing, we are delighted. You know, when people get to the fourth and fifth step, they have a lot of fear. And you know, part of that is our fault of AAers, is because we have not been closed-mouthed and confidential with the people that we have worked with. And I said our fault because we experienced the same thing in the States. People sat down to try to perform this very, very unique and magical and, shall I say, confidential step, and they don't, and they haven't done the work, and they don't take it as important or the gravity of it that you hold a person's life in your hand. And they gossip about certain things, and that turns people away from doing this. We're partly the fault about that, and that's because the program has been watered down. People telling you what you don't have to do. There's nothing in this book that tells you what you don't have to do. And when someone comes to you, oh, you don't have to do that. Well, the book don't say you don't have to do it. The book says this is what you do. So it says, withholding nothing, we're delighted. We can look the world in the eye. We can be alone at perfect peace and ease. Now, what is the only thing that can produce perfection? A power greater than you. Perfect peace and ease. Look at the word to use. Our fears fall from us. You see, I told you that fearful and resentful people, they're cut off from the sunlight of the Spirit. They're spiritually ill. But when your fears fall from you, it says, we begin to feel the nearness of our Creator. Didn't say God. It says you're created, because all of us were created by something. Bill used these words very, very succinctly when you look at how some places he'll use God, but there's some places he used Creator because he wants to include everybody in that. You will feel nearer to your Creator. We may have had certain spiritual beliefs. See, the only thing we had was a belief that's flimsy, that's upfront information. But now we're going to have spiritual experience. In other words, you're going to experience the nearness of a spirit greater than you. It says that feeling that your drink problem has disappeared will often come strongly. I can vividly remember that when I completed my 6th and 7th step, I just felt different. And something within my consciousness told me and assured me that I'd never, ever, ever, ever had to take another drink. And like Joyce, the same thing. I've never, ever, 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 ever had an obsession in the 24 years that I've been in this program. And I hear people say they're thinking about a drink. Well, you know, you have to understand the difference between a thought and an obsession. An obsession is a thought that overcomes all other ideas, and a thought is just a thought that you have that you can remember how it tastes, you can remember what it did, but you can also remember the fact that you can't do it. And you can also remember the fact of that you have an option today. You see, an obsession doesn't give you an option. You do not have an option when you're under an obsession. It says the problem has disappeared and often comes strongly. We feel that we're on a broad highway walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. And this is a part where I believe, and the book says, that you must. You can't just pass this over. It says, returning home, we found a place where we can be quiet for an hour. Carefully reviewing what we have done, we thank God. Now he uses God. Because see, you feel nearer to him. First he uses Creator, but then he comes back around and says God. See how he writes? He soft sells you, then he brings it back around and gives it to you. We thank God from the bottom of our heart that we know him better. Taking this book down from the shelf, we turn to the page which contained the 12 steps. Carefully reviewing the first 5 proposals, we ask if we have omitted anything for building an arch which we should walk a free man at last. Is our work solid so far? Are the stones properly in place? Have we skimped on the cement? We have put it in the foundation. And Bill likes to paint pictures. When he's talking about this arch, this is what he's talking about. You know, I'm a sort of a person that, you know, I see too with my mind. I see with my mind, not my eyes. And when Bill is painting a picture and you're reading, talks about the arch to freedom. Now, I'm not a very good artist, but I think I can try to do it. If any of you ever been to St. Louis, they have the gigantic arches there in St. Louis. And they have a film to show you how those arches was constructed. And they construct the arches simultaneously, both sides at the same time. But first they build a foundation. This foundation is step 1. See, that's a huge foundation. And then Bill talks about the cornerstone, which is step 2. And then at the bottom of page 63, he talks about the keystone. Now, you know what? I never really was able to appreciate this until I came here to the UK, walking through these cathedrals that you all have. 200 ceiling vaulted cathedral. I've seen this for years, but when I came over and saw this, actually, it really just kind of, the principle of it just kind of sank in. And he says, we're building an archway of freedom. You see, step 3 is the key and the keystone to recovery. That's why we emphasize step 3 as being indispensable. Turning your will and your life over to, and those of us who are a little bit more in tune with the Bible, know that who the chief cornerstone is. So this keystone is the one that holds the work in place. When they build that arch in St. Louis, they built these 2 sides, and then they placed this piece, which is an observation tower that holds the arches. When they had it up there, they would wiggle like that, but when they placed that in place, that anchored those arches up there. And those arches in St. Louis, they got little elevators that you can sit in, like a little bucket that takes you all the way up each side, and you can look out a little window in the observation tower. That's the keystone. So step 3 is a keystone. Step 4, step 5, step 6, step 7, 8, 9, 10, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. You see step 2 and step 12 are the cornerstone. And that's what he's talking about, how we build this archway to freedom. And that's what we walk through. Archway to freedom, as a free man. Now, many of us, we're not talking about free from shackles. We're talking about psychologically and spiritual freedom. And that's why he's talking about the archway to freedom. Now, when we talk about over here, next page, page 76. If we can answer to our satisfaction, then we look back at step 6. We have emphasized willingness as being indispensable. We talked about that yesterday. Are we now ready to let God remove all the things that we have admitted that are objectionable? Can he now take them all, every one? If we still cling to something we will not let go, we ask God to help us be willing. When ready, we say something like this. So hear it again. My Creator. That's inclusive. My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, the good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me the strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen. We have now completed step 7. And then it says, and now we need more meetings and more meetings. No, it says we need more action. It says without which we find that faith without works is dead. Let's look at steps 8 and 9. We have a list of persons we have harmed to whom we're willing to make amends. We made it when we took inventory. We subjected ourselves to a drastic self-appraisal. Now we go out to our fellows and repair the damage done in the past. We'll attempt to sweep away the debris which has accumulated out of our effort to live on self-will and run the show ourselves. If we haven't the will to do this, we ask until it comes. Remember, it was agreed at the beginning that we would go to any lengths for victory over alcohol. Now, the first thing is that we have go to any lengths for victory over alcohol. But the next thing is that we agreed to go to any lengths for victory over spiritual experience. Now, it says probably there's still some misgivings. As we look over the list of business acquaintances and friends we have hurt, we may feel diffident about going to some of them on a spiritual basis. Let us be reassured. To some people, we need not and probably should not emphasize the spiritual feature on the first approach. We might prejudice them. But at the moment, we're trying to put our lives in order. But this is not an end to itself. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be the maximum service to God and other people about it. It does not say anything our real purpose is to get our wife or a job back. And that's why some of us come to AA, to get something back. Not to receive something, but to get something back. And that's not what really the program is. It's not what you're going to get. It's what you're willing to give up. And if we're not willing to give up anything, we're not going to receive anything. And then it goes on to say, it is seldom wise to approach an individual who still smarts by injustice and announce that we've gone religions. And in the prize ring, that would be called leading with the chin. Now, let's drop to the bottom where it says, to the next paragraph, says, we don't use this as an excuse from shying away from the subject of God. When it will serve any good purpose, we're willing to announce our convictions with tact and common sense. The question of how to approach the man that we hated will arise. It may be that he has done us more harm than we have done him. And though we have acquired a better attitude toward him, we're still not too keen about admitting our faults. Nevertheless, with a person we dislike, we take the bit in our teeth. It's harder to go to an enemy than to a friend, but we find it much more beneficial to us. We go to him in a helpful and forgiving spirit, confessing our former ill feelings and expressing our regret. Under no condition do we criticize such a person or argue. Simply tell him that we will never get over drinking until we have done our utmost to straighten out the past. We're there to sweep out our side of the street, realizing that nothing worthwhile can be accomplished until we do so. Never trying to tell him what he should do. His faults are not discussed, we stick to our own. If our manner is calm, frank, and open, we will be gratified with the results. Now look at the percentage of the success. 9 times out of 10, that's 90% success. 9 cases out of 10, the unexpected happens. Sometimes a man we're calling upon admits his own faults. So feuds of years standing melt away in what? In 1 hour. There's 2 times in the book that Bill puts a time limit, and that's when you're dealing with making amends and you're dealing with taking an hour after your 5th step. Other than that, he may say a few months. But he specifically put times on this because most people want to know when and something's going to happen. But he's driving this home. And listen to this. Rarely do we fail to make satisfactory progress. Our former enemies sometimes praise us for what we are doing and wish us well. Occasionally they will offer us assistance. It should not matter, however, if someone does throw us out of his office. We have made our demonstration. We have taken the action. Now, I can tell you that when I started on my amends, that's when my life really changed. I could see the changes. When I did 6 and 7, there was a sense and a consciousness that things are going to be all right. But when I embarked upon going out and facing people and correcting the wrongs that I had done, you see, making amends is not the same way that step 5 is not a confession. Making amends is not an apology. Amends is correcting a wrong, righting a wrong. And our book gives us a simpler way to start. You know, some of us have some pretty extensive amends. If we can look at this, when we make this list, we can make it a now list, and we can make it a later list, and we can make it a maybe list. And then, like I said, we got a list over here, never. People, we said we're gonna never make amends. But we'll look at this as a reason not to even start. And this now list over here is real extensive. Because this now list is people like our parents, our siblings, and friends, the real close arena. But see, it's funny about alcoholism. When I showed you the diagram of how our life spirals down inward and gets small, while we're doing it, it's really spiraling out and pushing people away. We start with the family, then the friends, then the associates, and the people in the community, people we run into, and it's expanded. Before we've used everybody we've come in contact with. And so these people on this list is probably the people that are closest to us, because they're the first ones that we use. These people on this list are the people that we don't know where they are, they moved off. We can't find them, but we still have to put them on the list because we have to be willing to make amends. There's people on this list, well, maybe. They've done something to us, we've done something to them, but we feel that what they did to us was worse than what we did to them, but we know we gotta do something, so maybe. These people on this list, those are the people that robbed us and raped us. We didn't do anything. And we got lists like that. But our book says we will be amazed before we're halfway through. Because see, this process that we're talking about, as we go down to make these amends, and each time, rarely do we fail to make satisfaction. And 9 times out of 10, the unexpected happens. And this is a simpler way to get us started. Because each time we make one of these amends, we get a result from it. And results builds our self-esteem. There's 2 things that I have found that builds our self-esteem better than anything. That's honesty and being responsible for your actions. Taking responsibility of something that we said or that we did. If someone asks you, comes up, did you say something behind my back? I'm sorry, but yes, I did. That'll save a lot of heartache in trying to lie about it. You will, even if you did talk about somebody behind their back, what we call backbiting, and they ask you, did you do it? And you tell the truth, they may not like it, but they'll respect you more if you didn't. They may be angry, but they will say this, no, Pauline may have talked about behind my back, and if I ask her, she says she did it. You know what? She's not going, and once people develop some type of reputation and character about that, there's certain things that they're not going to believe about us. They said, now you may do some things, but this one I totally disagree with. And that's what character building is for. When we build character and reputation, people are just not going to believe anything that you say about somebody through gossip. I think it was Socrates says, and I may have this wrong, but he said something to the effect of, don't worry what people say about you. Live your life in a way where they won't believe it. You see, a person that lives by spiritual principles does not have to defend what they do or themselves. The principles will stand up. When we find ourselves having to defend something what we do, then you can bet that our intent and our motives wasn't sure. But if we're sure about what we're going to do, and that's how Dr. Bob lived. He lived by the 4 absolutes. Before he did anything, he'd ask himself, is this absolute love? Is this absolute unselfishness? Is it absolute pure? In other words, no motives and open. And is it absolute love, unselfishness, pure, and honest? Is it absolutely honest? And if it was, he did it and didn't worry about it. But if it wasn't, he wouldn't do it. That brings me to one of the most famous, reasons why we should do a step down. You see, as Eileen was talking about last night, when Bill met Dr. Bob, And he literally moved in with him for a while on Ardmore Street over in Akron. And they went through the steps. But when it comes to this step, Dr. Bob balked. He said, don't you know that I'm a doctor in this neighborhood? And I can't go telling these people that I've done this and done this. Now, every year he went to this medical convention in New Jersey. Every year he got drunk. So he was scheduled to go to this convention the same year, and Ann didn't want him to go. But Bill says, let him go. He's got to test his newfound sobriety. So he goes to the convention, and guess what? He gets drunk. He comes back home. The very next day, he has a surgery to perform. Now, Dr. Bob was the only proctologist in town, so he was the only one that could perform this surgery. In other words, he was a hiney doctor. He operated on your hiney. And it was a long-running joke about Dr. Bob that when you went under the knife with him, you can bet your ass on it. Because they didn't know whether he'd be drunk or sober. So Dr. Bob had this surgery to perform, and he come back home drunk, and he told Bill about it, and Bill gave him a few bottles of beer. The next morning, he steadied him, took him to the hospital just to steady his hand, and he performed the surgery, and Bill was outside waiting on him to come out of the hospital, and no Dr. Bob. So he goes home and tells Ann, he says he didn't come out of the hospital. And to his consternation, Dr. Bob had been going up and down the streets of Akron, making amends. And he had made amends to most of the people that he could, and he never took a drink since that day. But when he balked on this, he went to New Jersey and had a drink. Another part of it, which comes from experience, the part which says, except when to do so will injure them or others. They had this guy, his name was Eddie. And they were in their Oxford group meetings. And Eddie was admitting some of his faults in the meeting, and his wife was there. And when he started admitting his faults, she admitted some of hers. And when she admitted a couple of hers, he, pow, jumped up and so thus they learned that not to do that except within the injure them or others. So that's why they put that in there. We are not to escape our problems at the expense of other people. So they learned that through experience. Another thing too, this deal about, you know, people, I'll take a little sidebar because people will always tell you about, we don't get involved in other people's relations. Well, when they was doing this thing, did you know that Dr. Bob really didn't want women in the program? For that very reason, because he caught people on his desk making out. Another thing, back in the, I think it was 47, I have a letter from AA in Los Angeles where before they had the traditions that they was trying to kick this lady out of AA because she was slipping around in the program. And people will tell you, they don't know the history about this sleeping around. Sure, it happened, but it was not condoned, and it definitely was not just pushed under the rug. So Dr. Bob and some of the, here's another thing. We have, in Little Rock, Arkansas, we have the dubious distinction in Little Rock of having the oldest group in AA west of the Mississippi, and that's a lot of miles. Our group in Arkansas, Little Rock, Arkansas, called the 120 and a half, started in 1940. We also have the dubious distinction, and we're in the big book about that book, a little blip about that group, where we were the first group to be started by mail order. All of the other groups started by people taking the groups to Chicago, St. Louis, but our group was started by mail order. 2 alcoholics, one called Sterling, was trying to get sober and heard about Bill Wilson's experience. And this guy had had an experience the self-same way. Matter of fact, just to kind of tell you quickly, this guy named Sterling was an insurance salesman. He came to Little Rock and he told his boss, he said, I want to tell you, I'm having a problem with drinking. And Sterling had been reading The Common Sense of Drinking and had been working with his priest to try to combat his drinking. And he told this guy, he says, I've been having a problem with alcohol. I want to tell you that. The guy says, I don't care if you have a problem. He says, the only thing I ask you is if you drink, that you come back and tell me. So he comes to Little Rock, started this insurance company, and the main office was in Memphis. He comes to Little Rock, and sure enough, he drank. So he was downhearted and dejected, and he was driving back to Memphis to tell this guy that he had drank. You know, he was really dreading and telling this guy. But on the way to Memphis, the guy had a heart attack that he had to tell that he was drinking and died before he got there. And he had a spiritual experience as a result of that. And when he had this spiritual experience, this other guy named Harlan, which was a friend of Joe's, he says, man, I heard of a guy in New York that had an experience just like yours. So he wrote a book. So let's send off and get it. So they send off to New York, 1940, for this book. The first time the book came, Harlan got drunk and the book went back. But they resent for it and the book come back, and this guy in Harlan started the group in Arkansas in 1940, a year after this book was written. And here it is, right. I always have problem finding this, always. So that just goes to tell you that even though you know it's in there, but everybody have a problem finding something in the book. I'll find it at break, and I'll bring it back next time, right after break. But getting back to this. So we see that each time we do this list, this list is getting shorter. And each time we do this list, we get results. And the results give us confidence. The results build our self-esteem. And our promises says we will be amazed before we're halfway through. By the time we finish this list, we're not even halfway through. We haven't even gotten over here. And as I was talking about yesterday, it says, let's look at these, page 83. Bottom of page 83. It says if we are painstaking about this phase of our development, what phase of our development? The amends. We will be amazed before we're halfway through. We're going to know a new freedom. Now, new means we've never had this type of freedom before. And a new happiness. We've never had this type of happiness. We will not, man. We will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. No matter what we did in the past, we won't regret it. No matter what happened to us in the past, we won't regret it. These nevers over here. It says, we will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. No matter what happened to us. Instead of closing ourselves off in a closet and saying, poor me, and you don't understand, no, we can see how it can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. You don't understand how I feel. That's as a result of taking these steps. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively, that's the one that got me. You see, I thought I was a pretty smart fellow, and here I am, walking around trying to change my behavior with my thinking, and it was to my consternation I couldn't do it. And I started questioning my sanity. Because each time that I would say that I was going to do something, I would always find myself repeating that or doing it again. And I would tell myself, we said we was going to quit doing that. But I couldn't. I couldn't stop doing what I was doing. And when I read this in that book, you will intuitively know how to handle things that used to baffle you. That's what I was. I was baffled. I kept asking myself, why you keep doing this? Why? Are you crazy? And I could not stop. So when I read that, bam, that jumped out more than anything and got my attention. And that's what I was looking for. It says, we will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. I couldn't change that. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They're being fulfilled among us sometimes quickly, spiritual experience, sometimes slowly, spiritual awakening. But they'll sometimes, always materialize if we go to meetings. Now, if we work for them. If we work for these and take the steps, they will always materialize. That's where we get the promises from, working the steps, not going to the meetings. And then it says, this thought brings us to step 10, which suggests that we continue to take personal inventory and continue to set right new mistakes. See, at first, they were wrongs, and now they're mistakes. Because see, in the past, we intently and we purposely wrong people. But if we do it now, it's a mistake. We're not intending on hurting people. And if we make a mistake, guess what? We can correct it. And yesterday, when we was looking at this mental, social, and physical area, we're going to take a look at this again. Matter of fact, I'll tell you what, we're going to go ahead and take a break now, because I know some of you always would love to have a fag. And we're going to come back at 11:15, all right, before I get in this. So let's take a break and come back at 11:15.